Hello and welcome to Murder with Friends, the show where two friends get together and talk about some of the darker sides of history. I'm your host, Grace Baldridge, and joining me today are actually two of my best friends and returning all-stars to the Murder with Friends studio. Welcome, Jack and Amir. Amir, you are obviously the co-creator of Murder with Friends.
Obviously.
People already know you. Jack, you have been doing some stuff since the last time you were on the show. Last time you were here for Charles Manson. Now we're going to be talking about Jonestown. But I understand that something cool, like that you've been up to some stuff since the last time?
Yeah, I've been working on some music projects.
What's the name of your band?
My band is Fuckwitch. It's a country western influenced doom metal band. So we're really trying to get a lot of the radio play right now, actually. So we filmed a music video to try to promote that.
So I guess let's jump right in. How would you guys sum up the Jonestown Massacre, the Jonestown People's Temple, Jim Jones, to someone who has no idea what we're talking about?
It was the biggest loss of life until 9/11, and I think it was like the last great...
It was the loss of American life in a single event.
Loss of life.
Loss of life ever.
Yeah,
Loss of
ever.
life.
Crazy, right?
Mm-hmm.
No,
Since
but
9/11.
yeah, just that, and I think it was like the last major evil cult from
Death
like the
cult.
death cult from the 70s.
I think that's why people are so captivated with Jonestown is because of the scope, and also that it moved. This was a mobile cult. This didn't just happen in one place. This was a leader that had some major reach. But just to start right off, let's go to a quick clip right now that describes exactly what we're going to be talking about today.
Nobody joins a cult. Nobody joins something they think is going to hurt them. You join a religious organization, you join a political movement, and you join with people that you really like.
I think in everything that I tell you about Jim Jones, there's going to be a paradox. Having this vision to change the world, but having this whole undercurrent of dysfunction that was underneath that vision.
Some people see a great deal of God in my body. They see Christ in me, a hope of glory.
He said, if you see me as your friend, I'll be your friend. As you see me as your father, I'll be your father. He said, if you see me as your God, I'll be your God.
So that's a great place to start. Let's talk about Jim Jones, the leader of this cult. What do we know about him, and how did he rise to be such an enigmatic cult leader?
Tell us, Grace.
Yeah,
No, I'm asking.
Grace would let us know.
I was waiting for one of you to raise your hand. So let's talk about Jim Jones.
You
Okay.
tell us about Jim.
So Jim Jones, early on, people have described him that knew him as a kid, very fascinated with life and death and religion and power. We're talking about a kid who was reading Mein Kampf, Hitler's book. He was learning about Stalin. He was weighing the pros and cons of these different sorts of leaders. He would kill a cat just to hold a funeral for this cat. But he's not the same sort of kid that we're talking about with like a Jeffrey Dahmer. Like he was isolated from society to an extent. He was an outcast for sure,
He was a weirdo.
He was a
but
weirdo,
that was it.
but he found ways to connect with people, and a major one was through religion.
Yeah, he wanted to connect with people.
Yeah, and he had some roots in, I believe it was the Methodist Church, and he really took to being a preacher. And he also was a champion of racial equality very early on. There's a story, and a lot of what we know about Jim Jones came from his own sort of recordings of his life, so we have to take that with a grain of salt. But there's a story that he brought an African-American friend of his home, and he was going to invite him over for dinner, and then his dad wouldn't let him into the house, and so Jim Jones says that was the last time I talked to my father, saw my father for years.
Wow.
But what is the significance of Jim Jones reaching out to people that I think he probably did perceive lower class than him?
I think the interesting thing with Jim Jones in the interracial church is, I'm from the South, I'm from South Carolina, and there is still not integrated churches. It is still, a quote I heard was, the most racist time in the American South isn't Jim Crow, it's Sunday at 9 a.m. integrated churches just don't exist. They don't really happen. There are some, obviously, but it is definitely a black church or a white church. And Jim Jones' real thing was, if we can bring everyone together into one room about God, then I can get them the next step. Then I can talk to them about socialism, which was the main thing that Jim Jones was after, less so much the Bible. The Bible was the icing to get to that socialist cake. And you needed a people's revolution, and a colorblind people's revolution is a populist people's revolution.
So he kind of saw it as an opportunity to find these vulnerable people that didn't really belong anywhere.
This also began in Indiana. So he started, forming his own belief system, forming his own sorts of followers in Middle America, where the black community was absolutely on the fringes of society, and he felt that he was, for whatever reason, I think you phrased it pretty well, he was sort of a weirdo. He also felt like he was on the fringes of society, so I do think that it was sort of an opportunity for him to reach out. But what do you think was the jump that he made from Christianity and being involved in the Methodist Church to, I don't really actually believe any of this, I think I'm gonna go break out on my own? Why couldn't he have just become a really powerful church leader in Indiana?
Delusions of grandeur. I mean, this whole thing kind of goes back to him really kind of dog whistling, like, you can totally just worship me instead of God. And like, he makes these little statements like we saw in that clip of, if you want to call me God, like, that's cool, like, that's fine, and kind of pushing everything away from a traditional church into this new belief system. And if you're in that belief system, you can't go back to another church because it's not what you believe anymore. He's making this isolation environment that you see in all abusive relationships are about isolating the person you're abusing. And by changing the core belief of Christianity, even slightly, you're isolating those people.
Do you think he knew he was going to do that from the jump? Do you think that as soon as he got involved as a preacher, he sort of viewed it as a window to get his own sort of following?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a big part of his personality. But you also have to keep in mind what the times were like then. This is the 60s, 70s. The distrust in the government and any other authority figure was at an all-time high. So people were looking for all these different avenues, and I think he got caught up in this, that the government is evil, everyone else is evil, we gotta get something like socialism in here. That's gonna be the great savior.
Yeah, so 1970s, his church moves from Indiana to California, San Francisco. Why did they make this move? I think a big part of it was because Indiana was a little closed-minded. It was very white. It was. And I think that he did want to expand. He did believe in integration. This was something that was huge for him. And I think that central to his teachings. And I think he felt that California, San Francisco, and outside of San Francisco in particular, was more of an opportunity. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, for
more
sure.
fertile ground for his message, and a ton more people.
And a lot of people went with him, by the way, from Indiana to California.
Greyhound buses.
Yeah.
Just took the track.
He would refurbish these Greyhound buses and then stop along the way, and he would stop at schools or youth group meetings. Churches would invite, because he was still, at this point in time, there was a little bit of Christian doctrine in what he was saying.
There was, and he was a pillar of the community too.
Yeah.
And you're gonna talk about later, he got really involved in the political landscape as well.
Oh yeah, I would actually argue that given what I know of his childhood, where he was learning so much about what political leaders were teaching, I sort of think that religion was just a means to get him involved in politics and teaching about his political views for the world. But he would pack up these buses, and he had followers that were coming with him from Indiana to California, and he would stop along the way and speak at youth groups and say, if you want to change your life, I'm telling you about this utopia. I am talking about a perfect society where everyone is equal. He was a huge communist, or some form of a communist. Jack's giving me a look like he was like, you don't know communism. We'll talk about it, okay?
That makes it sound like I'm a communist.
And people would, have a night to think about it, and then they would ship out to California, and he started forming this community in California. And I want to throw to a clip right now that sort of has a little bit of eerie foreshadowing of what Jim Jones was like, what the People's Temple was like before they moved to Guyana. Let's take a look.
Edie? Are your fingers numb? In your right hand. Reach the fingers out that are bothering you. Now, is the pain gone?
So look at this guy. This is a guy that has people almost literally, you see in that video, eating out of the palm of his hand.
Yeah.
You know, and so he takes all his followers from Indiana to California. He starts building this utopia. He convinces them that he is a healer. And I think when he's in California, we start seeing this transition from a religious figure or sort of a beacon of morality to a bit of a cult leader. He views himself now as a healer, and he's planting these people. He's planting a secretary and having them dress up, showing that he can heal. And then his followers are coming in droves in California. Jack, we talked a little bit before about how his cult started picking up a major following.
Grace and I had talked about Charles Manson before, and Manson's family was small. It was like 20 people, maybe at its most. Jones's was hundreds, and pretty quickly. And that's a massive size difference. A couple drugged out hippies that have a place to stay and a little bit of food versus people that give up their entire life to go follow this guy to, there's no internet. You can't be like, well, what's that area like? Do they have McDonald's there? Like, will I be able to, like, what's the school system? They were just like, here's some pictures that we've got in a pamphlet. Come out to this valley and we're just gonna be into Jesus and socialism together. And people were like, yeah, sounds great. Let's get on the bus.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what they believed and then what they did when they lived in a Jonestown, when they lived in these compounds. So they believed, as we said a little bit before, about equality, total equality. And then once the cult formed, they started throwing out the Bible. In fact, there's a story where Jim Jones would take the Bible and sort of just chuck it like football, basically to illustrate that this book has no power. This is the book that has kept black people down for so long. And again, his church was so integrated. This was a very attractive message to his followers. You know, this book isn't the answer. He's throwing it away. What's left? I'm the answer. So with that in mind, people really wanted to believe whatever he was teaching. And a lot of what he was teaching also was lined up to a lifestyle that he was promoting, which was actually a really difficult life because he preached of this utopia, but they would have to work for it. And I'm hearing stories about they would sleep 1 or 2 hours a night, and they were sort of plotting land, and they were trying to grow their own food, and they were trying to also they had to work. Some of them were working waitressing jobs.
Some of them had to work waitressing jobs.
I mean, can you imagine?
Can you imagine waitressing?
Can you imagine? No, can you imagine waitressing, like doing your job as a waitress and then coming back and having to build houses at the end of your shift? Just, you know, you're done, you made your money, and then you'd have to turn over every single paycheck to the cult or to...
I can't now, but I feel like back then, yeah, this was awesome.
This isn't
for so
back
many people.
Then. It's 1972.
It was so different in that time, though. I know it wasn't that long ago, but in the 70s in San Francisco and California, like, you felt the ecstasy of something big like this happening, and you wanted to be involved in that with everyone else and go listen to this guy that's saying all these amazing things about integration, about all these liberal ideas.
I want to toss to a clip right now about Jim Jones talking about euthanasia, basically, because I think that in this clip we see that he's still the enigmatic and charismatic leader that we've talked about, but very quickly towards the end of the 70s, he starts to take a turn. And before he gets to that, let's throw to this clip.
One of the powerful things that Jim used to keep us to not think was that we were never really allowed to speak with one another. I'd look around and I'd say, am I the only one that feels this way? I learned eventually not to say anything to anyone.
We had a lady who visited us a week ago here and was speaking to one at the door, and she was a member of a prominent church, a pastor's wife. And she said, I think that the poor should be made to control how many children they bring into the earth. You remember? Some leading scientists say we have to have euthanasia. Oh, no. Oh, no. Who's going to decide who and when a person's going to die? We must never allow that, because this is the kind of thing that ushers in the terror of a Hitler's Germany. We must not allow these kind of things to enter our consciousness.
That's pretty interesting, right? So he said that actually at the end of the 60s. So he was saying that at the end of the 60s. He's still in California. We're seeing that he has this grip on the congregation, but it's a little bit different than the healing clip I showed you before.
He's still legitimate at this point too. It's not until later on in the 70s when everything starts falling apart.
He's still a preacher, but I think that you see him, instead of preaching acceptance and this welcoming message, it's isolation. And it's really, we have to retain the members that we have. And I think that the ultimate isolation was moving from California.
To contextualize some of that desire and that emotion is there were a lot of socialist movements throughout the United States, and everything from racial separatist movements to like back to the land movements, a lot of the hippie communes, even Mormons have the same thing. You see this all over, and the FBI does not play around with that stuff in any capacity. It's very scary to be a person like Jim Jones when the FBI is known and has documented, I'm not a conspiracy guy in any capacity, this is like a hard fact, plant people into organizations all the time. That federal land case recently, one of the big issues they had with the trial with the guys that like took over that like
Bundy?
Yeah, the Bundy thing, was that like half the organization were FBI plants. They weren't even like actual believers. And Jones, as we see later, gets more and more paranoid, and that was condescending to do that about paranoia. But I think he was just like, I'm not safe in the US. They killed Malcolm X, they killed Martin Luther King, they killed JFK. I'm on that level. I'm just like Malcolm X. I'm just like Martin Luther King. They're gonna come for me next. And that delusions of grandeur. Really, any type of separatism is bad for a government. Every mile of land that you lose control of as a government delegitimizes you as a government because people are saying, I don't need you. Those Mormon compounds, Waco, all those are delegitimizing the United States government by proving essentially that they're unnecessary. And so you have to take them out.
And we're talking about thousands of people who were following the teachings of Jim Jones, and they were, I think that's a great thing to point out, Jack, they were plotting more land. They were growing very quickly. People wanted to be a part of this because...
It became a big voting bloc too. That was the huge deal in San Francisco, was they could sway local elections in a heartbeat.
And I think it's something worth pointing out as well is that the compound in California that remained even when a lot of people moved to Guyana was, for all intents and purposes, really quite effective. Was really, you know, they had an old folks home that people were saying they took amazing care of the elderly. There were some people that would sell all their possessions, all their belongings to join the commune because they saw how well taken care of everyone was. So it was a little bit of a utopia, but when they move to Guyana, things take a turn for the absolute worst. And we're going to tell you all about what happened and what was life in Jonestown before the massacre when we come back. We'll see you then.